different, we are different too. So we're going to perceive them differently. We're going to understand them differently. So it's actually a mutual change that has gone on. And then another word barrier is polarization. So that's the process of using language of extremes, where there's no areas of gray. It's black and white. So if you find that you are one of those people that tends to talk in absolutes or polarized language, so it's either all or nothing, you know, that's a barrier to language. So be aware of that. Make sure that, you know, you're understanding the concept of gray areas and that those do exist, and it's not always all or nothing. Okay, so biased language. I want to briefly talk about that. Biased language, something that is worth talking about, sometimes frustrating to talk about. Words can affect the quality of relationships with others, obviously. Sexist language is certainly something that can affect quality of relationships. It can be offensive, it can create defensiveness. Sexual orientation is another topic that can, you know, involve biased language and create difficulties in relationships. Ethnic or racially biased language, another issue. And then any demeaning language due to age, ability, or social class. And there are many, many more. Those are just kind of the major ones. But here's an example. If I say the words black, African American, Negro, or person of color, all have been used as part of normative language throughout our history, and some are used now, some are not. But how are you or I to know the proper terminology? If we're trying to be conscious of not using biased language and not using words that can negatively affect relationships, how am I or you to know whether it's appropriate to say that someone is black versus someone is African American? We as a culture have moved away from using the term Negro because it has been very offensive, especially with its connotation to the slave era. So we have moved away from that. So remember early on in the slides, we talked about what changes or what conditions need to exist before a word is added or taken away or changed in our language. In that specific example, we as a culture realized that it was offensive, that it had negative connotations, that it was a part of our history that a lot of us regret. And so we, out of respect and out of an attempt to make amends, moved away from that type of language. Person of color, also something we've tended to move away from. However, that actually became, for a while anyway, a preferred term. Rather than being called black, there were a lot of people that wanted to be called person of color. I think we've kind of tended to move away from that again recently. But again, as you know, me, little white girl here, you know, how am I to know what should be used, what's appropriate? There's an example that I have. I was actually in a class over the summer with a girl from the Virgin Islands, and she gets very frustrated because Virgin Islands are considered an American territory, and so she has a U.S. passport. Even though she speaks with an accent and is from a Caribbean nation, she is considered an American citizen. So not only does she deal with people thinking that she is not Americanized or not, you know, understanding of American culture, but she gets called African American all the time. And she says, I am from a Caribbean nation. I am not African American. I am a Virgin Islander. That does not mean that I need to be called African American. And I think out of respect, people think that African American is more politically correct than black. But the reality is there are plenty of black individuals who are not African American. In several of the Hispanic countries, for example, there's a very, very large Black population, and they are not African Americans. So how are we to know what is proper terminology? And we can try to be as sensitive and as culturally appropriate and as politically correct as we can, and we can still be offensive because the context is not right or the language is not right. And so that's just something I wanted to throw out there and have you think about, because we don't want to use biased language, but we don't want to be so consumed with it that we make matters worse either. And so it's a very slippery slope, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Speaking of political correctness, let's think about a few words. We no longer use the term policeman. We now use police officer. We no longer use the term fireman. We use the term firefighter. We no longer use the term stewardess. We say flight attendant. So look at the list can go on and on. I just ran out of room. But examples. Political correctness, we have decided that we need to change what we call professions and occupations because we don't want to be offensive. So if we're talking about that, what does it mean to be politically correct? How would you define what it means to be politically correct? If you want to reflect about that, that'd be great. I'm not going to share my definition because I don't want to taint your thoughts. But why do we use politically correct words or phrases? What is our motivation behind trying to be politically correct? And kind of as a side note to that, why do people take offense at some words? They are just words after all, right? And here's my devil's advocacy for the day. If all people don't react the same, so if you can say a word and one person is not fazed by it at all, and one person is highly offended by it, can you argue that the problem is with the individual? So it's not the word, it would be the individual's reaction to the word. Food for thought. And do you think it's excusable if someone doesn't know that they are potentially being offensive? So if you're not aware of a politically correct expectation, can you forgive and forget that someone might have been offensive if it wasn't intentional? What are your thoughts on that? And do you think we can take political correctness too far? I argue that you can, so I'd like to hear your thoughts. Okay, so let's briefly talk about being assertive versus aggressive. Responding in an assertive manner allows you to make requests, ask for your rights, and generally pursue your own best interest. And I think often people will use the terms synonymously, and they're not. Assertive is making sure that your rights and your desires and your requests are equal to everyone else's. It's not putting yourself above, it's not putting yourself below. It's putting yourself in an equal position. So you're making requests, you're asking for your rights, you're pursuing your own best interest, not to the demise of anyone else. Being assertive is pursuing your own best interest without denying others' rights. Now, being aggressive is expressing your own interest while denying the rights of others by blaming, judging, or evaluating other people. So, when you're being aggressive, you're putting yourself above and your rights and your beliefs and your interests above other people. You're trying to put them down by blaming, judging, or evaluating. So as you can see, they're very different. And often people will say, oh yeah, she's really assertive, she's really aggressive. Two very different things. And again, the power of words, the power of language. Every person is going to have a different connotative definition of those two words. So what you might think is assertive is maybe not what I would think is assertive, and aggressive vice versa. So there's going to be a personal level involved with all of these. But overarchingly, assertive is we are both equal. Aggressive is, I'm ahead of you and I'm going to try to put you down. Okay, so you can respond to aggressive or inappropriate communication by using your I language that expresses your thoughts and feelings. So here are 5 steps to behaving assertively. And I'm hopefully giving you tools that you will be able to use for the rest of your life. But I would like you to try this week to practice doing this once. So at any point in the week, if someone responds in an aggressive way or an inappropriate way to you, I would like you to assert yourself using these 5 steps. So describe how you view the situation. Monitor your nonverbals, especially your voice, because as soon as someone is aggressive or inappropriate, your instinctive reaction, remember we have a fight or flight, so your instinctive reaction is going to either be to fight, so you're going to have increased aggression, or flight, which means you're going to react in fear. So monitor your nonverbals, make sure that you're calm, but you're confident. Okay, so you're describing how you view the situation using I statements. I feel, I think. Disclose your feelings because you want to build empathy. Identify the effects on the other person's behavior on you. So this is what I think is happening with the situation. This is how I feel. This is how you have affected me. But notice that you're not going to say, you did this to me. It's, I feel this way. I experienced this. Okay, this is your hardest of the 5 steps. Be quiet and wait for a response. But make sure that in your silence, that your nonverbals are not communicating anything. So, often we have a tendency to be quiet, but our body language and our facial expressions and all of those things are communicating, all of our thoughts when we're not saying anything. So this is going to be your biggest challenge. Be silent, wait for a response, and make sure that your nonverbals are not communicating other messages. And then paraphrase, remember we learned those skills, paraphrase the content and feelings once the other person responds. And you just repeat that as necessary if the issue continues. So those are your 5 steps to behaving assertively. I really encourage you, practice it at least once this week. If you practice it, use that as your reflection. Share with me the situation and what happened and the results of the assertive behavior. And actually, let me very quickly give you an example, because when I work with families, I have a lot of times families will ask me, if you're only going to work with the child and we're a family unit, so you're only changing the child's behavior, how is that going to benefit all of us as a family? And I like to use the example or the visual reference of the old time scales, especially that like you'll see on lawyers' business cards and things. They have that old balance scale where there's like the center bar and then it comes over and the 2 things hang on each side and it balances. So if you think about in a relationship, in a family unit, in any type of interaction, all of the members work toward a homeostasis or an equal level place. Okay, so that's what relationships are about. You kind of juggle and you move and you change and you modify to reach that balance, right? So through the decision to, when someone responds to me aggressively or inappropriately, I'm going to behave assertively. Remember, assertive is not aggressive. Assertive is my needs and my desire and my best interests are equal to yours. So I'm not putting you down, I'm not putting myself up, but I'm going to make sure that my needs are being met in an appropriate way. So when you make a decision in an interaction to behave assertively, it's almost like you can look at it as you take something off of your side or you add something to your side, however you'd like to view it. So if there are grapes on each side of this scale and it's equally balanced, and I take one grape off of my side or I add a grape to my side, doesn't matter. That's a decision that I've made that I've changed